All right, Ben, welcome to the show, man. I'm super excited to have you on here.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
So, I am really stoked to have you on because you have quite a detailed, I should say, robust entrepreneurial background. For people who don't know you, you used to run a business called Bean Ninjas, which is, if I can say, one of the largest sort of online tax businesses for entrepreneurs and specifically people who are running location independent businesses, which you have since then sold and are now working on your own. And so I'm really excited to sort of dive in deeper on your story and also share some of the lessons that you've learned through that entire that
hmm
story.
Yeah, no worries. Just minor correction. It's a bookkeeping business. It's not sure if that makes it less exciting or more exciting, or just
Listen,
just as
I
boring.
so I don't know if this is a bad son moment or anything like that, but my mom is a bookkeeper. And I've always said that she was an accountant. And she always corrects me that she's a bookkeeper. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't understand the difference, mom. And so I have to be honest, the entire sort of like bookkeeping, tax, accounting thing just sort of rolls all into one for me, which I don't know what that says about me as a business owner. But, how did
No,
with that sort of background, that's one of, I would say kind of like a more traditional quote unquote background. What
mm,
made you transition from that into then, running online businesses? And how did you just sort of move into that online business world?
yeah. So I didn't fit in very well with other accountants. That's what I studied at university. After a little bit of music education. Um, Studied at university, got a job at a suburban tax firm, and it was kind of boring. Um, Working, doing tax returns, being the lowest rung. It's like, okay, sure, I'll do that data entry job, no problem, but it's boring and it doesn't have any sense of progress in going somewhere. And so I went and worked in the city in a big accounting firm. It was a mid-tier one, and turns out that was boring in a different way. Um, so, so I went chasing a sense of progress in what I do and a bit of meaning as well. Like, just filling out tax forms, saving people some money wasn't all that interesting. So from there, I started working in businesses because honestly, that's why I got into accounting in the first place. Someone gave me Rich Dad, Poor Dad at a key moment, and apparently the lawyer and the accountant see everything. And so if I wanted to learn about business, that was a great vantage point. But it turns out that the accountant, you can see a lot, but you can't necessarily change things. You're still an
What do you mean?
employee, you're still a team member. Like, you're not the business owner that can make the decisions on how the
Mm.
business should be run.
So you can kind of like
Um,
suggest things and say like, hey, here's what the numbers are saying you should do this, but at the end of the day, you don't really have control over it, is what you're saying.
yeah, exactly. So for me, I had was it the Entrepreneurial Seizure? I think they call it in the E Myth book of like, not want to do this on my own. And in particular for me, it was when my first child was on the way. And I was at the time only intending to have one. And so I'm like, okay, I've got to get into business and it's got to be an online business because, I need to be able to work from home, work from anywhere in the world, but, home was it for me so that I didn't waste any time in a commute. And, if baby was doing something interesting, I could like run out of the office and see it. Um, and I wanted to be in charge so that number one, I could guarantee the flexibility. Number two, I could earn a bit more. And number three, just, wanting to be in charge, wanting to mold my own destiny a little bit. And so that's what got me from not fitting in with accountants very well to running my own business.
There's been a few people on the podcast who have started their business because there was a kid on the way, right? Like they kind of
Mm.
saw, hey, I'm going to have a kid. I need to start a business in order to have more control over my time and also,
Mm.
our future. And that to me is so interesting because I couldn't think of a worse time to start a business because you essentially have two babies, right? Like you have this one really
Yeah.
demanding thing that's your business. And then on the other hand, you also have this really demanding thing, which is your child, right? How did you
Mm.
manage doing both, right? Because I'm imagining if you just started a business when you had a kid on the way, that doesn't necessarily give you enough time to get that business to a point where you can step away from it to take care of a kid. So how did you sort of balance that game of working on the business and having to put in all that work up front in order to get it going and then also having a kid, and what are the like productivity lessons that you learned from that balancing act? Because I'm sure that there must be some.
Yeah. Yep. It was, as I thought, really important that whatever I did didn't require a huge number of hours of my time. And so that meant that I needed to earn a very big hourly rate from whatever
Mm,
it was. I charged fixed prices. The first thing I started offering was tax services, filling out tax returns for people. Doing that for businesses, the hourly rate is really high. And so I only needed to work a couple of hours per week, literally 2 or 3 hours per week, for our low lifestyle costs at the time. And that meant that there was plenty of time to spend with the baby, but it also meant I didn't need a huge number of clients, which means that I didn't need to spend a huge amount of time finding clients in the beginning.
mm,
And so that was kind of the key for me that made it all work in the short term. I did end up spending maybe 4 or 5 hours a week finding clients. There was a service I signed up for that basically, when people were looking for an accountant or some other service provider, they put in their details and then it got sent to a bunch of us. And we all like raced to the phone and tried to be the first person to give them a phone call. And for me, I would just like sit while my daughter was playing on the floor, or she was with her mum, or she was asleep or something, and I had notifications set up, and I would just like hit dial and walk out of the room and have a quick conversation with someone. Turned out to not be very hard, but I think I was a little bit lucky that, number one, that service existed, and number two, that I knew what I was talking about just enough to convince other people to sign up with me. Um, and yeah, just that I guess there are a lot of non-Australian people also as my competitors. So it was kind of like there was a bit of a blue ocean. There wasn't much competition. I think
mm,
definitely I got lucky managing to line those things up. But also, like, because there was the baby, I had an extremely compelling reason to like get over myself, get over my fear of reaching out to people or possibly being rejected. It's just like I just had to make this work. The stakes were really high. And so that like got rid of a lot of the mind crap out of the way,
mm.
which was very helpful when starting a
Have you
first
found any
business. It's a bit
ways?
nervous.
Have you found any ways to like almost simulate that? Because again, this is another thing that I've heard from people who have kids is like having kids sort of puts things in perspective and forces
Mm,
you to like now you have to provide for someone and like now
mm.
you have to spend time with someone, so you better not be surfing YouTube when you should be working. uh
Yeah,
have you found any ways, I know that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, have you found any ways to like simulate that for people so that maybe if you don't have a kid, but you can get the benefit of having this this reason to get over yourself and to get kicking and to get moving on the business.
yeah. It's I'm going to take a roundabout approach to answering that question at first, because I always wanted to be a digital nomad. Like I know this is what the podcast is about, and you've had some great interviews. I've always wanted to be a digital nomad for the exact same reasons, that that sense of freedom, the ability to travel, not being beholden to those things you don't like about working for other people. Like I did all those things and I just didn't travel. Um, but the interesting thing about the approach of making life suck less is that, like, it takes away the pressure, it takes away the drive a bit. Um,
Mm.
and so sometimes for people, I say to them, make your life suck a little bit. So sometimes that helps, because like if your life is great, you have no drive to do anything to improve it. But like the big thing I've noticed for a lot of guys when they have their first child is like suddenly this whole I want to provide a great life for my kid motivation, just like the hormones give it to us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I want a better life, like a really strong drive. And like for a lot of people, it's getting out of the cubicle. Like they have a really strong drive to get out of the cubicle. And then once they're out, it's like, well, life's actually pretty great. I don't have a
Yeah.
strong drive to change it. So sometimes making it suck a bit or putting yourself in a more expensive environment. So, like instead of a nice cheap beach in Thailand somewhere, or somewhere spectacular in Eastern Europe, it's like you go to like one of the large cities in the world, like London, Paris, Tokyo, San Francisco, New York. I'd say Sydney, Toronto, like one of the big capital cities where it's expensive to have a nice life. That and then you go there and you're like, oh, I don't want to spend that amount of money. So you have like you start compromising on things, and then you're like, no, I don't like this. I want to
Mm-hmm.
work a bit harder. Like sometimes that making your life suck a bit can help. Um, and I don't know, it feels like a kind of a mean or nasty thing do to yourself. The other way is like, what do you actually care about? Like everybody has something that is really important to them, and sometimes it's some hobby thing, but you need money to fund the hobby thing. And so like tying your strong desire to do this hobby to landing the client that you're about to get on a sales call with, sometimes that can help. Or sometimes it's just like, what kind of a difference do you want to make in the world, like, or for other people, or what achievements do you want for yourself, or what kind
Mm-hmm.
of position of influence are you interested in the community, or what do you want to do right? Think about what it is that actually really matters to you, and then find a way to make money from that in a way that's congruent with your values. And when you start doing that, it's like having a calling, as opposed to just like, oh, I just want to make money so that I can fund a fun lifestyle. That sense of calling gives you the purpose and the drive, uh, to make a difference. So when I start working with my clients, the very first thing I ask them is like, what are your goals? What do you want from life? And we spend a bit of time digging into it. Like the first thing people say is, oh, I want $10,000 or whatever it is in personal income a month. Or I want to sell my business one day so I never have to work again. I'm like, okay, why? What do you want to
Mm.
do instead of this business? Maybe we should get you heading in that direction sooner. It's like the Tim Ferriss mini retirement idea. Don't put it off. Go there now. You'll be more motivated that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you were saying kind of about make your life suck a little bit is very interesting because it's actually something that I did in a slightly different way when I dropped out of college because I had this realization that I was headed down this path of like, oh my god, I'm gonna be a person who goes to the office at 9, leaves at 6. Like I just saw this like white picket fence, like very regular mundane life, and I was on that path, and it just terrified me. And I
Yeah.
knew that I am I have lazy tendencies enough to the point where like if I just stay on this well walked path, I might end up going somewhere where I don't want to be. And I was like,
Exactly.
okay, I need to do
Mm.
something that causes like a radical shift and makes sure that I don't end up there. And so I dropped out of college. And I was like, if
Mm.
I don't have this easy ability to just, like ride the roller coaster through to like, this like very regular life, then like I'm going to have to
Mm.
figure something out. And so it caused a lot of issues and uncomfortability, but it was the action that I needed to take in order to make sure that I don't end up where I didn't want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about, if you stayed on the path, you just kind of get carried to that place you
Mhm.
don't like. It's like, you're on a boat relaxing on a nice tropical river. I'm like, oh, this is nice. And then, like, there is a waterfall ahead and you got to do
Right.
something about it. But it's so nice and calm. And I'm being, yeah. Yeah. If you want to talk about the at the end thing that you don't want to go for, think about tax accounting. That's up there as well. I think you and I have something in common.
So
Mm.
how did you then go from, like you were saying, you were getting clients, you had this sort of uh, place to kind of get clients from, right? Like you were saying, there was this sort of service that you were signed up for. I want to hear about how you transitioned from that to then starting Bean Ninjas. But before we do that,
Mhm.
what would you suggest people do if they, don't have something like that service, right? Like you said that you feel like you got
Mm.
very lucky in the beginning because that existed. If that didn't exist, and for many people listening, they're probably wondering like, man, like I'd love to have that option, but a
Yeah.
lot of people don't. So what would you suggest they do in the very beginning to start getting clients?
Yeah, very beginning, whatever skill you have from your job, go on Upwork. Um, there are lots of people searching for jobs. Honestly, for some people, when they think, "Oh, I want to hire someone cheap," they go to Upwork. So there, it is a little harder to earn larger amounts of money off of Upwork. It's not impossible. Upwork's one, if you've got the right skills. TopTal, TOPTAL, is a good one. That's for more brain jobs, like developers, and yeah, there's some accounting, financial controller type roles on there. So like jobs that require degrees and a bunch of experience and pay a bit well. TopTal is a good option there. Um, there's a few other platforms, Dynamite Jobs. There's a few get a remote job um, boards out there, and recruiters as well that specialize in filling jobs for remote companies. Um, so I think remotivate.io,
Hmm.
there's a few of them out there where if you want a remote job, like there's quite a lot more than there was even like a couple of years ago. So I think I was lucky at the time, but like now you don't need luck quite so much. I mean, you need to know how to best maximize the possibility of getting a good outcome on each of these places. But there's blog posts and courses and YouTube videos um, about the steps you need to follow. So, like, if you have a skill, then just search how to make money online with skill, and there's bound to be a
Mm.
bunch of things. Um, but I would suggest, yeah, Upwork, TopTal, recruiters be a good place to start.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of anybody who wants to start working online. I think people kind of like tend to overthink things in the beginning, and
Yeah.
they're essentially thinking like 10 steps ahead instead of exactly what's in front of them.
Mm.
And I think, something like an Upwork, or even there's now Fiverr Pro, are
Yeah.
really good options for people to
Yeah.
start, actually doing and testing the thing that they want to do online. And like, yeah, you're
Mm.
going to be trading time for money. And I think there's all of this like idea of like, stop trading time for money, but like, no, start there and
Yeah.
eventually work yourself out of that. But it's very difficult to just go from 0 to 100 right away.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of skills you've got to learn. It's kind of like when you study, you finish your schooling in university or college, if you go there and you get into the workplace, there's like most people are familiar with the idea of soft skills. Like you come with some technical skills, but you don't know how to interact with people in a workplace,
Mm,
how to communicate, how to be professional, how to dress professionally. Like all of those soft skills you don't learn until you actually get into the workplace. And it's exactly the same with working online. Like there is some specific soft skills. It's not necessarily dressing, but it might be about profile photos. It's not necessarily about resumes, but it's about profiles and applications and how you fill things out. Like there's a lot of skills there, but honestly, you don't need to be amazing at it before you start. Like a lot of the learning
hmm.
happens as you do it. So I totally 100% agree with you. Don't overthink it.
So how did you then go from, talking about, you essentially did that, you didn't overthink it, you started selling a service, but then you were sort of ready to move on. So tell me more about
Mhm.
that. Like how did you transition from essentially offering these services on your own to then starting what ended up being a very large company with Bean Ninjas?
Again, there was a little bit of luck, but when I was first starting on my own, it was yes, I can do that for you, and underquoting what I probably should have charged, but it was enough because it's just me. I didn't have to pay for anyone else. Um, and then after about 6 months of doing that, saying yes to a bunch of things, I noticed that there are a few things that no one seemed to be doing well. So, tax returns for online entrepreneurs is complicated because depends which country they're in. There's some exemptions, and if they sell stuff online, there's like multiple sales tax issues from a lot of different states that they might be operating in or have customers in. So, like, there's extra complications, and no one seemed to be all that good at it. People would go to like really big accounting firms and spend what they felt was a enormous amount of money, and even those people weren't 100% comfortable about it. And it was exactly the same with the bookkeeping part. So not filling out the tax return, but like the putting all the numbers together so you can look at a report on how well the business is doing. It was the same thing with bookkeeping. In fact, it was worse with bookkeeping. Like, people tried to hire bookkeepers and they wouldn't know, like, what's this? Asana? What's Trello? And they look it up and they Google it and they look at it and they're like, I still don't know what Trello is. And so it'd just be like a lot of friction for people to work with a bookkeeper who's constantly asking these questions that to the business owner are really obvious. And so I noticed this being in an online business community. Highly recommend communities, by the way. Being in an online business community, I noticed this gap in the market. And this is where I think we got a bit lucky, or I got a bit lucky again, is because it's not often that you see a gap in the market. Like, as things change, as the way we work change, there's not a lot of competitors and there's a lot of people who need the service. And so being the first in a new market or a new way of doing things gave us a big boost. But just honestly, it was because we knew what our customers needed and what a certain type, like online businesses needed a bookkeeper that wasn't super expensive, knew what was going on, and they also needed a tax accountant. We didn't do the tax part, but there was 2 or 3 tax accountants that did really well for the exact same reason. Like, there was a gap in the market because of a change in how things worked. And as part of this online community, I found another Australian accountant joined, and I'm like, I'm not insane. There's another person like me who's like, I don't like the way accountants normally do things. So we got to talking, and it turned out that we both had similar ideas about a bookkeeping service that we could then delegate to people, so we'd be able to then travel the world with the families. And so, yeah, we just came up with a name in 7 days. We did, what was the book? The 7-Day Startup by Dan Norris, which is basically like, okay, it's possible in 7 days. We're accountants. We know kind of what's involved. So, and off we went. And then all we had to do was say, hey, we're bookkeepers and we understand your online business and we're not super duper expensive. And people are like, where's the buy button? It was fairly easy for a little while. Before like everyone else heard about us and heard about how fast we were growing, because we posted about it on the blog, because that was a thing at the time, being transparent in your content marketing. So yeah, it was a very interesting journey, but it started from just knowing your customers and knowing what they need.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the things that I talk about when I work with people is like, it's something to consider is how high up the totem pole is your business, right? Like, with bookkeeping, any business that is doing, a decent amount of money needs to have a bookkeeper, right? So that's a very high on the totem pole service, and I imagine this is why it's like you found the need and you said, hey, here it is, and it's a very important thing to get right in your business. And so the buy button was easy to click on. Wow, if you have something that you're offering that is kind of like, this would be nice, but it's not super important, doesn't mean that the business isn't viable, but it's a lot harder to like sell. And then also, if something happens like COVID, you're going to be a lot easier to sort of be the first service to cut, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I would say to people, don't run off and start a bookkeeping business, because there are sucky reasons about to run a bookkeeping business. Like, it's a trusted position. People are not going to switch until their existing bookkeeper screws up. And so, it can be long relationships with people before they switch over. But for us, all bookkeepers sucked, because they
Yeah.
didn't understand the business. So, like I said, we got a bit lucky.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I had this conversation, but before we jumped to do a podcast. But I had a similar experience with a bookkeeper where he didn't know what a Google Doc was, and I was just
Mm,
like, I need like this isn't working, right? Like if you don't know what a
mm,
Google Doc is and how that works, like what else don't you know about my business and what is that costing me, right? So
mm,
I think that you're totally right. It can be really difficult to switch a bookkeeper, but if you have such a good offer us to like, hey, your bookkeeper doesn't know what a Google Doc is. We do. That's
mm.
that's certainly a pretty nice offer. I'm curious
Yeah.
about one of the things that I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, about the way that B Ninjas worked was that you guys were offering a set price, right? You guys weren't
Mm,
charging by the hour. So how do you said that in the initial idea of the business, you wanted to almost immediately hire somebody to delegate this work on so that you weren't doing the day-to-day things. So I think one of the things that
mm,
people struggle with, even people who have had a business for quite a while, is how do I price a service and offer it as a product and then pay somebody to do it hourly and make sure that I'm staying profitable?
yeah, it is a challenge. The term productized service is very popular in online spaces for many years, and everybody trying to squeeze their idea into a productized service when it's not really a fit for the concept, just because they like this idea of like, oh, it's processes and people, and I don't have to do anything sometimes. Um, so there's two big things that people need to really think about. One's applicable to every business, and one's only applicable to if you want to make a productized fixed price service, kind of like we did with Bean Ninjas. So I'll start with that one first. Is it has to be a set thing that you do for people. You can't customize it very much, if at all, between clients. Otherwise, you can't set up processes that your team do over and over again with every single client, so they're really efficient at it and it's really straightforward, so you can hire cheaper people. um, if you don't like really narrow down what you're doing so that every client gets basically the same thing, if you don't do that, it's gonna suck. um, you're going to be like, okay, I've set my prices. Um, why is it taking so long in sales calls to explain what we do? And why is it taking so long for my team to understand what needs to be done? And, I'm trying to write processes, but like, man, there are so many processes to write. Like, it just feels awful, if you don't narrow it down. Now, if if you're okay with, you don't want to subscribe to the productized service thing too closely, and you want to like think a bit broader about, okay, we're going to be an agency or we're going to provide a service, or if you're going to sell a product, but we'll stick with the service thing for now. If you offer something that's 90% standardized and a little bit customized, or 75% standardized, if it's like almost, pretty much all standardized, but a little bit customized so customers feel valued and you can charge a little bit more of a premium for it, you can make that work. Um, but it does make it harder to have a fixed monthly fee on a pricing table that everyone has to choose one of three options for a fixed monthly fee. So like that's thing number one, is like being very careful about what you're actually offering and making sure that
Mm.
it's fairly standardized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so essentially the reason why I'm assuming is because when it's standardized, you know roughly how long it's going to take for someone else to do it. So you can kind of like price
Yes.
it accordingly.
Yep. You know exactly what the steps are. You know exactly what the skill level of the person needs to be. And you know exactly, if you know what the steps are, you know how a manager can supervise the quality of that work, how the quality of that work can be checked. Like the whole thing becomes a lot simpler. You need 10 processes instead of 200 processes.
Mm.
And it means that anyone in the business doesn't need to be particularly smart or working particularly hard at keeping all the balls in the air, all the different ways, remembering how you do it for different clients.
Mm.
Mm.
And let's stick on this topic of pricing a little bit because, it's something that hits home for a lot of people, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
how do you determine a price? Like, I think with something that's
Yeah.
like a productized pricing or even like your hourly pricing, like, yes, you can look at what other people charge, but you don't necessarily want to base your decision just off of that, right? So, how can you
Mm.
decide what to charge for a productized service? Like, do you just look at how much it will cost you to hire somebody that's competent at it and then add on a couple of percent? Or like, is there some sort of way that is better that you would suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two ways of thinking about it, top down and bottom up. But before I do that, I want to say what people do when they first start out is that they will quote whatever price actually gets them the sale. Um, and that's kind of okay. Like, you need clients, you need practice at learning what they need and what's involved in delivering the work, and it's worth sacrificing a little money in order to get a sale across the line. But you can't do that if you want to pay someone else to actually do the work for you, or you want to have a team with managers to like totally take everything off your hands. You need to think a lot more carefully about it. So there's top down and bottom up ways of thinking about it. Bottom up is, okay, what's actually involved? How many hours does it take? Multiply that by an hourly rate of somebody. And then, as you said, add some extra money on top. And there you go. There's your price. People usually fall down here because they don't know the how much extra to put on top bit,
Mm.
or the bit that they guess ends up sending them broke after not too long. So, like, there are a lot of things that your pricing needs to cover apart from the person who does the work. Needs to pay for the marketing and sales time, effort, investment that it took to get the client. So the marketing sales effort of the clients who didn't sign up, plus the one that actually did, all that needs to be covered in the price. Otherwise, you won't be able to pay yourself for that time that you're getting the new client. You won't be able to pay anyone else to get a client either. It needs to cover, there's all your other expenses like software, like credit card processing fees, like your website hosting or your memberships to XYZ and your own education. Like, all that needs to be in the price as well. And if you want to grow the business without having to massively jack up your prices as you do, like, you need to be able to pay for managers as well to manage the people doing the work. So like, there's a lot of things that pricing needs to cover. I've got a blog post with the full list. But like, that's why people kind of fall down. It's like, number one, they don't realize that price needs to pay for this. And then number two, they don't know how to work out how to actually pay for all those things. Like, how much is it? You could sit with a pen and paper and try and work it out. If you're an accountant, there are basic things we get taught in the first year that you can use to work this thing out. But for me, it's you multiply the cost of the person doing the work, whatever their cost is to do the client work, you multiply it by at least 3. There's the magic number.
Mm.
Some people are going to hear that and go, no way could I charge that amount of money. So like, start with multiplying it by 2, but at least 3. If you multiply it by at least 3, then as your business grows and scales, you'll be able to pay for everything.
And so that, like, essentially tripling of the price of somebody else to do it is what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
should cover all of those costs that you mentioned, like the cost of,
Yep.
marketing and, like the software and all that kind of stuff. You kind of are
Yeah.
guessing, quote unquote, that it should cover those.
I've found it to be pretty consistent that not only does it
Right.
cover those, it covers the owner just for being an owner, not for the work that they're
Mm.
doing, not just for the work that they're doing. And there's money left over. It's a
Mm.
good rule of thumb that works only for an online service business because we don't have to worry about paying rent and
Right.
all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is I totally agree with this. Like, I think, you need to start at whatever you need to start in order to get
Mm.
clients and to get some experience under your belt. And I think there's a lot of conversation in this online business world of like you're not charging enough and you need to be
Mm,
charging more, and I totally agree with all of that, right? With most people like you need to
mm.
be charging more, but in the beginning you got to charge what you got to charge to get clients,
Yeah.
and maybe that means you're going to get the short end of the deal for, you know,
Mm.
a few clients and a few projects, but you need that in order to kind of like get your feet wet. When
Yeah.
should people raise their prices? When do people know, like, what are some of the signs that people can look out for that should tell them, like, hey, it's time for you to raise your prices?
Yeah, I got a couple. When you're getting busy is a great time because then you don't care if the prospect says no, that's too expensive for me.
Mm,
And so that fear that always makes you automatically discount before you even say the number out loud, like that's gone. Like you don't care. Best time is when you're almost too busy. Then another way to think about it is if you're selling on a sales call or applications or proposals or whatever it is, and everyone says yes, it means your price is too low. Uh, you should be only getting like 70% of people saying yes. And the other 30% should be saying, actually, you're a bit too expensive.
mm,
Um, there's a good rule of thumb as well. So, like, if you're not busy and everyone says yes, you can creep up your price a little bit. Um,
mm.
and people will probably still keep saying yes. And then, yeah, when you're busy, you'll be brave.
I also think there is something interesting that happens when you do raise your prices where you actually end up getting more clients. Like my wife, for example, she's been working with online course creators for quite a while. And a friend kind of saw what she was charging. You know, she kind of like just did it on the side, like, you know, just for a little extra, you know, like the, you know, to cover the beer tab on the weekends and that kind of stuff. And a friend saw what she was charging. She said, like, you need to raise your prices. And the moment that she did, all of a sudden, all these new clients came out and they were trusting her with way more work because of the value that she was placing on her skill set. Like all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
way bigger clients came out that were looking for somebody who's more trustworthy, and everything that
Mm.
she said almost like carried more weight, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When people start out, they take the shortest path to get a client. And
Mm-hmm.
the shortest path to get a client is quote a cheap rate to a cheap customer.
Mm,
Because a cheap customer will jump on someone who looks amazing but is charging a cheap amount. Like they're the people that move the fastest. And so it's really hard, but wonderful if you can make this transition to going after bigger clients that are happy to pay more for basically the same thing.
mm-hmm.
Because you know it's your effective hourly rate goes up, you can spend more on higher quality staff to do a high quality service. Um, and one of the things that most people don't really understand is that bigger clients will get turned off if you're too cheap. Like they'll say no if you're too
Mm-hmm.
cheap because they will automatically assume, and they'll be right, that if they're not paying you enough, you can't possibly do the quality job that they want. Um, like you know, if you go to a Fortune 100 company and say, "I'll do your website for $2,000," like no way, absolutely no way. They're like, why did you waste our time? Like, we need an amazing website that's going to provide a fantastic result, and you can't possibly do that for $2,000. There, you know, um, and so like raising your prices for bigger clients can actually increase the number of conversions and increase how seriously they take you and how much they refer you, and like life can just be a lot easier once you have that realization. And it's very hard to work your way up there if you're used to the cheapest price gets the client kind of mentality down at the commodity levels. So what I suggest is like every call that you have, you raise your price a few percentage points, raise a little, raise a little, raise a little, and then it does, you know, it's not too far outside of your comfort zone. And then as you see that every time you raise your price, it doesn't seem to affect how often people say you're too expensive. Like, oh, okay. I could raise it some more. And then that's when you start realizing, oh, when Ben said that you should, 30% of people should say you're too expensive, he was right. I'm like, I
Mm.
could just keep raising this thing. And like, I've had clients I've explained this to, and like they've doubled their prices and then doubled them again and still signed up the same number of clients. And initially you're like, why did you pay this much? You could have paid some cheaper with like this person on Upwork. And they're like, we didn't want cheap people on Upwork. Like, we want someone we trust to do a great job, and we're willing to pay for that. And so yeah, it's a big transformative thing, can make a big difference, for your business and for the amount of money that you earn and the amount of hours that you work.
To kind of stay on this topic of pricing a little bit longer, how do you justify a value-based price? Because one of the things I think
Mm.
that happens is if you're good at what you do, you may look at a project and say, okay, this realistically will only take me, let's say, 5 hours. And even if you're charging $100 an hour, that's only $500. But you know that what you're delivering as a product is, very, very, valuable to that business. So,
Mm.
like, how do you then determine that price where you're like, okay, even though I don't want to, you're kind of selling more of a product and you know how long it's going to take you, how do you then how do you put a price on that sort of situation?
Yeah, this is the better way to price. So I said before that there was bottom up and top down, and now we're about to talk about top down. Just as a quick reminder, bottom up was how much is it going to cost a team member to do it, multiplied by 3.
Hmm.
That's like kind of a bare minimum for you to have a viable business, but you can often charge quite a lot more, especially if you've got a marketing service or some service that provides a really obvious, they get more benefit than the price that they pay you kind of a thing. So top down or value based pricing is you start with a price and then you work out how to make it profitable afterwards. And by starting with the price, there's a number of ways you could do it. Like, you can look at your competitors and see like how much they're charging and then price accordingly. You can have a think about the value that you're creating. So if you're a business coach, for example, who can work with a client, charge them $10,000 a year and get them an extra $100,000 of profit, not naming any names, then that's kind of a no-brainer for people, and it's one hell of an hourly rate for the person delivering that service. That's not my actual rates, for example, just to be clear.
Right.
There's something different, yeah. But if you're a marketer and like you charge someone $2,000 a month to do email copywriting, like you write the emails that sell somebody's course, for example, you charge $2,000 a month, and because of your writing, this person earns $50,000 a month because of these emails that you're writing for them. You could probably charge a little bit more than $2,000 in that case.
Mm.
There's a couple of different rules of thumb. It does depend on the industry a bit. Usually for marketing, you could charge 10% of the revenue result that you generate. If you're doing ads, then the cost of the ads also needs to be included in this 10% for some clients. For some, they don't care. 10%, anywhere between 5 and 15% of the result that you generate is a good rule of thumb that you can use. And then, to continue with the top down method, you then say, okay, this is the price I'm going to charge. You divide it by 3. This is how much I can spend on the team that's actually going to do the work.
Mm.
So it's kind of like that number 3 is coming back, but we're looking at it from a different angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I also like one of the other things that I've like talked with people about is like, and I think the email example works really well with this, is also like, you can also measure like how much more money, how much higher of a percentage of conversions are you getting or are you
Mm.
expecting to get based on your updates. And then if you know what your client charges for different services, what does that percentage actually mean in terms of money? And then
Mm.
if you work out that it's gonna be $50,000 more, you can very easily say, okay, well, then in that case, I'm going to charge you 20K for it or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is tying back to what I was saying earlier about the bigger clients. You can do the exact same thing for and charge them a lot more because, like the email copywriter, for example, writes a great email for someone who has a list of 100 people, or the email copywriter who writes a great email for someone who has a list of 1 million. Like they're going to write
Hmm.
exactly the same thing and it's going to get a lot bigger result. So, like, you have a certain skill set and it's more valuable to certain types of customers. And because it's more valuable to them, you can then charge more for that service. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you suggest that people make this transition from, I think services like Upwork are very good even for higher priced services. I've seen people on
Mm-hmm.
Upwork that charge, in the $100, $200 per hour range. Obviously, they have very high level skills. How do you
That I
suggest that
just
people
Sorry, I just want to
go ahead?
pause you there. That in my mind is not a high price. That's a high price
So
for
what is?
Upwork. A high
Uh-huh.
price would be thousands of dollars per hour. Like that would be a high price. And that's what the email copywriter example could get. For example, sorry for interrupting. I
No,
just wanted to.
that's totally fine. So I think that's interesting that in terms of, I think a lot of people, myself included, have a skewed understanding of what is a high price per hour for quality
Yeah,
work, right? Because even for me, like 100, $200 an hour, if you're doing copywriting, is a relatively high price. But you're saying no, it could be far higher, and businesses are okay with paying that.
yeah, absolutely. I've had a few email copywriter clients who charge $5,000 to $10,000 per month for 4 emails.
Mm,
That they then pay team members at $100 to $200 an hour to do. And there is a crap ton of money left for the business owner who's done nothing but landed the sale. 100 to 200 an hour. I think the problem is perhaps thinking in terms of hourly rates as opposed to
mm,
flat fees for a result. So if you're like, I'm the world's best copywriter, and so I'm going to charge $500 an hour, even, that's not actually the hourly rate of the world's best copywriters.
right.
Um, the world's best copywriters, their hourly rate is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Um, like it's mind blowingly insane. But they don't actually talk about hourly rates. They say, all right, who are you? You have 10 million people on your email list, and you're launching a course that's going to potentially earn you 5 million from the one launch.
Mm,
Yeah, I'm going to charge you 500,000 to write the email sequence, and I'm going to, oh, here's another client I've done this for. I'm going to use these, and I'm going to tweak it for this client, and I'm going to put a bunch of in there, and I'm going to maybe spend a couple of hours interviewing the people on the email list. But it's like, yeah, $500,000, and it's 10, 20, maybe 50 hours work even. And still, like, that's an enormous hourly rate. But it's because you're starting with like charging a percentage of the value that the person gets from it, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the time it took to do it. There's a meme out there, and there are a billion different variations of it, of the story of an engine mechanic for a navy boat or whatever, who comes, finds out the engine's broken down, or whatever the term is for navy boats, and he comes and he's like, he spends a couple of minutes looking at it, and he does a light tap and says $10,000, thank you. And they're like, what is all this? And then and can you send us an itemized invoice? So he does. Okay. And on the first line of the invoice, he says, tapping the engine $1. All the years of experience to know where to tap $9,999. Um, like the fact that you can get a result quickly is great. That shows you're a master of what you do, and the people who want a quick result are willing to pay a lot of money to have everything just work and to get the result that they want. So, like, just thinking in terms of hourly rates, like, I don't think about my hourly rate anymore. I mean, I did kind of with Bean Ninjas, and I did kind of with the tax stuff, but it's like, if I'm going to make someone millions of dollars, then like they don't care what my hourly rate is either.
I think it also comes down to perspective in some way. Like I totally agree with you that, there's, if you start out from like a percentage and like what you're going to be adding to as in terms of value to businesses is one way to get there. I think the other important thing here is perspective, knowing what
Mm.
businesses are paying for already. It's
Mm.
interesting because one of my friends has spent time working with very large companies that say they're startups, but in basically in every reality they're not startups anymore, if you know what I mean. But
Mm.
one of the things is he's like, we have different backgrounds, and that he's worked with a lot of these large, funded startups, and he knows what they're paying for some things. And then on the other
Mhm.
hand, I didn't have that experience. I sort of started from the bottom. And he's like, knows that, somebody's charging tens and tens of thousands of dollars for something that other people are offering for very little money. And because he has that perspective, he knows
Yeah.
that he can charge more for certain services than some of his competitors. And that's worked out well. And I think this is why,
Mm.
uh, podcast listeners have probably heard me talk about Parable before, but that's one of the things that I was really excited about in terms of showing like, hey, look at what's going on behind the scenes of some
Mm.
of these businesses, because having that perspective and knowing, oh, you're charging, this much and it's still working because the businesses see
Mm.
value in it, or, oh, you're paying that much for this service, that means that there's room to start something. So,
Mm.
yeah, I totally agree with that. Uh, we're sort of running out of time here, which is insane because I want to talk about Bean Ninjas, and I feel like there's so much more that we can talk about. But maybe we'll do an episode 2 with the entire Bean Ninja
Yeah.
story. But I know that you do quite a bit of kind of business coaching and some things around goals and how to set proper
Mm.
expectations. And I do want to touch a little bit on that because I think it's really important to understand how to properly set good goals. So what are some of the
Mm.
mistakes that you see people make, and how can we as online entrepreneurs, like you're saying, understanding how to set goals for yourself if you're a 9 to 5er is one thing, but understanding how to do it
Yeah.
as an online entrepreneur and a digital nomad is a completely different thing. So, what are some of the mistakes that people make when setting goals, and how can we as location independent entrepreneurs set better goals?
Yeah, yes, we could do a whole podcast episode on this. Like most of my clients, I start with a 2-hour session to cover this stuff. I think setting goals. I want to blame New Year's resolutions. I think for what I'm about to say. Is New Year's resolutions, it's like you're at the start of a new year, anything's possible, and so you set this pie in the sky goal of like, I want to see my abs this summer, or something like that, and you're like, okay, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sign up to the gym, and then I'm never gonna go.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of this disconnect between the goal, the plan, and reality. Like most people, they set a goal and the first thing they do is they go spend money and then they're done. Like, they don't do anything else. Thank you, consumer culture. Um, what I suggest that people do is like, don't just have like a hope kind of a goal of like, wouldn't it be nice if we could like not have to work? Wouldn't it be nice if we could, have so much money from our investments or the sale of a business that we never have to work again? Like, yeah, that's my goal, is to sell my business for enough money that I never have to work again. And like, quote unquote, that's their goal. Like, that's what they write down. Sell my business for enough money to never work again. And the problem is that's not specific. So they don't know what that number actually is. And so there's no way they can build a plan to achieve that number. So there's an acronym. It's fairly popular. It's SMART, SMART, and there's different versions of it: specific, measurable, achievable. No, specific, measurable,
Actionable.
action based. Yes, realistic, and time based. And it's like 5 criteria to evaluate and improve the way you've written down your goals. There's a Wikipedia article, so I won't do a little sermon on that. But the basic idea is you've got to make your goals more concrete. And the thing I do with my clients, and I'll give the basic process here that's really helpful, is if your goal, let's take the example of sell the business for enough money that you never have to work again. let's actually get specific. How much money do you need in this lifestyle where you're never working again? Like, how much income do you need? If it's $100,000 a year, to pick a random round number, say it's $100,000 a year, like actually think about it. Well, I want to live here and I want to be able to travel and do all these things because I'm not going to have any work to fill my days. So I'm going to want to do a lot of stuff and it's all going to cost this much. So let's say it's $100,000 that you actually work it out of how much it will be. Maybe it's 200, maybe it's 50, whatever the amount is, work it out, round it up a little bit in case you've forgotten something, but work it out. That's your after-tax income. So whatever your tax rate is, you can, bump up the income amount by that amount. Then you say, okay, well, this money I'm earning for investments, let's, use a 4% safe withdrawal rate, which is a figure people can Google. Mr. Money Mustache did a great blog about it. 4%. So, okay, 100,000, you add a little for the tax and then you divide it by 4%. And that's the amount of invested capital you need. And you can go a step further and you can say, well, if we need that much invested, we need to sell the business for a certain amount so that after the taxes on the sale of the business, we have that amount to invest. So then, you're adding a little bit extra and you're finding out what you actually need to sell your business for. And then you can keep going. You can say, well, if we need to sell the business for 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, which honestly is about the number that most people need for the never have to work again number, somewhere between 2 and 4 million. Like, okay, if we need to sell the business for that much, what does that tell us about the business at the point it's sold? It tells us that there's X million dollars in revenue, there's X million in profit, or 100,000, X 100,000 in profit for a buyer to want to be able to pay that. It depends on the business you're running. There's multiples, the word is. But depending on the business you're running, you can actually work backwards and say, this is the amount of revenue I'm aiming for. Based on your prices, you can say, this is the amount of customers I need. And then you can kind of, once you've got the amount of customers to aim for in order to hit your never work again goal, it's like suddenly you've got a number you can plan on. You can say, okay, if I need 50 customers at X price, 50 customers, a bit too much for me to handle on my own. In fact, I probably need 3 staff to handle that. Here's the price of those staff. If it's like 5 staff or more, you're also going to need to hire a manager. Like, you can start building a super concrete image of what your business is going to look like. And then you can work towards it. Like, if you need a certain number of clients and you want to sell your business in 2 years, well, you kind of work backwards. I need to sign up X clients per month on average to hit that goal. Is that a reasonable target? Do I think I can actually achieve that? Maybe not now. Maybe you're not so good at signing up clients, but it will ramp up over time. Or maybe it's just a bit unrealistic and you're like, okay, what am I going to do differently so I can still sell my business in 2 years and never have to work again? So like, once, we've taken this, I'd like to never work again because I sold my business. We've taken it. We've actually gotten specific, more and more specific. Then you know where the gaps are of like, I don't know how to sign up 10 clients per month. I'm going to go do a course on that. That's, $200. And like, suddenly everything that you do in your business to grow your business, every new client that signs up, you're like, I'm much closer to never having to work again. Like, you know the exact number you're aiming for. And this ties back to the motivation question you asked me earlier, like for people who don't have a baby. Like, if you do this exercise, like, motivation is a lot easier to come by, partly because you can see that you're making progress and you can see how to make progress, but also because for most people, when I do the calculation, it's not as far off as they thought. It's like, oh, I only need a $2 million revenue business, not a $50 million revenue business. Oh, okay. Yeah. Whew. That feels much more achievable. And all the fear and the paralysis and everything goes away and the excitement takes over. Like, awesome. Like, I can see the clear path and I know exactly what I'm going to have to do, or I know exactly the things I need help for. I tend to talk a lot about this because I'm really passionate about, like, I've seen the amazing effect it has. Like, I used to say to people at the end of this session, like, do you want my help? Do you want some support to keep going with this? And every single time they would say yes, because like, they're really motivated and they can see exactly what they need. People can do this on their own. Like, I've given the framework. I have a couple of special numbers that make it easier, but you can find these if you really want to do it yourself. And I suggest everybody do that with their goals. Get specific and find a way to break it down into like, what do I need to achieve? What are my milestones every month in order for me to hit that exact goal in the time that I want?
Yeah, I think that like there's really three important things in terms of goal setting for me. Just like while you're talking, it's like, yeah, like making them specific and understanding all of the stuff that we just talked about. Because like, yeah, I want to see my six pack abs in 8 months. Is like, okay, great, but like, how are you gonna do that? And like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
like, where are you at right now? And there's so much unknown there that I can almost
Mm,
like guarantee that you're not going to get that. The other thing is also,
mm,
like you said, breaking it down and actually taking that goal and like figuring out, okay, well, how are you going to do that, right? What does that mean? Like, are you
mm,
going to go to the gym 3 times a week, and like, what are you going to eat, and like, all that kind of stuff. Like figuring out what
mm,
are the actions and actually following them. But the one thing that I think is kind of difficult to get right is understanding like how do I say this? Like it sometimes it's almost you don't know what you don't know yet, right? And so setting
mm,
these like year-long goals I think is really tough for people because there's so much unknown that you can set the goal, or like the action being like, hey, here's what I'm going to do, but you don't know how time is going to affect that and how that's going to have to change. And you kind of there's no way that you can know that something's going to I don't know if this is making a lot of sense, but essentially there's a lot of variables. The longer the goal is, there's a lot of variables at
mm.
play that could change everything. So kind of wrapping up the goal setting, question, how can people, keep an eye out for that and essentially work those variables that are going to happen, but maybe they don't know what they are. How can they work those into their goals?
Yeah. So if you do the process that I mentioned of like, the what number of clients your business needs to have when you sell it and you work backwards, like you have in this month I need to have this many clients on board. In this month I need to have this many clients on board. Don't tie it to a specific date. Um, and that will help with a lot of the derailing because things are going to slow down or speed up. Nothing's a smooth ride, and you might decide to change course completely. So if you just say like month one as opposed to like August 2021, in
Mm,
month one I need to have this many clients, in month two I need to have this many clients, making it more of a milestone based sense of progression with a loose association to dates. So, like, milestone number one is, I have X clients and I'm starting to hire my first person to help me deliver the work. I expect that'll probably happen in 3 months from now, call it just say October instead of 3 months. Um, I think that, I expect that'll happen in October, and use the date as more of a sense of like, if it looks like it's going to take longer than that, there must be something going wrong. And then you go into like fix it mode to try and find where the problem
mm,
is, get some extra help, that kind of thing. As opposed to like, if you actually put dates on everything and then like you miss one and then suddenly it's like you give up the whole goal, your motivation can unravel. So I think there's a saying, have strong beliefs lightly held, or something
mm.
like that. It's like you believe passionately about something, you work really hard, you're motivated, but you can change your mind. You can be a bit flexible. I think
Yeah, you're
something like
open
that's
to
helpful.
adjusting based on new information.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm also a really big fan of, and this has made a lot of difference for me when I started doing it. And I'm not an expert in it in any way, but kind of doing like quarterly resets, and kind of like, okay,
Mm,
like what happened this quarter? What do I want to do next quarter? And like, do I want to adjust? What has happened over the
mm,
last 3 months? And, does that change my beliefs and like my goals in any way and kind of adjust that way? That's been really helpful for me because like for me, a year is like it's such a long amount of time that I have no idea, what could happen. And so for me, kind of
yeah.
looking at it in these little chunks of quarters has been really helpful to me.
Yeah,
But Ben, listen, this has been an absolute blast. We're gonna have to do, a second interview sometime to cover the
sure.
Bean Ninja story. But let people know if anybody has been listening and is interested in learning more about you, finding out more about your services, and just in general connecting with you. Where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, so my website is profitscollective.com. And if you misspell that, I do have a couple of the other domains that point you the right way. Profits Collective. On the website, I've actually got a couple of calculators on there. Like you fill in a couple of points and I give you some strategies on how to improve your business, how to earn a bit more from it. Because at the moment, I have a mission for 2021. I want to find 10 million, help people get 10 million in extra profits across all the people that listen to what I say on podcasts or the clients that I help more directly. So this is something that I'm trying at the moment. This idea of give me a couple of details and I'll help you get out of the hole or help you move a bit faster than you thought. Or people can find me on Facebook. We'll have links in the show notes, I'm sure. But yeah, website or Facebook, best places to get me. I am on LinkedIn, but if you message me, please don't look like someone who's about to spam me with their wonderful service that I don't actually need.
Or trying to hire you. I always get people trying to hire me.
Okay. Yeah, we've got this
Which
great
is
job for you. No.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Well, Ben, seriously, thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Had a good time.